Letitia mocked KASH'S faith on live TV. His calm response left her speechless. In a world where media moments come and go in seconds, few manage to stop a nation mid-scroll. But when a high-profile talk show host known for her sharp takes and spiritual soundbites invited a government legal strategist with deeply conservative roots into the hot seat, no one expected silence to speak the loudest. The stage was set for a takedown. Cameras rolling, audience primed, the opening question sharp enough to wound. But instead of defending himself with fire, he answered with something no script could predict: conviction. Not volume, not spectacle, but a story drawn from real life, real people, and real faith. What happened next wasn't a debate, it was a shift. In the room, in the viewers, maybe even in her. This wasn't just television. It was something rarer, a moment of truth that couldn't be edited, engineered, or erased. And in that moment, everything changed. Stay with us, because this isn't just about two people clashing on air. It's about what happens when truth refuses to flinch even under the lights. The envelope looked elegant, cream-colored, embossed with golden trim. But it wasn't what Kash Patel expected on a Thursday morning. It wasn't from a senator, a court, or an advocacy group. No, this one came from a talk show studio. Inside was a handwritten note. Mr. Patel, we're hosting a national conversation about faith in modern society. Your voice, especially as someone from the legal world with a traditional worldview, would bring balance to the table. We hope you'll join us. It was signed Letitia Co. Kash held the letter a little longer than necessary. He'd seen Letitia on television, magnetic, sharp, unafraid to challenge anyone from politicians to pastors. Her show regularly trended on social media, and her audience was vast and vocal. National conversation, he muttered, or national ambush? His assistant Ben walked in, phone buzzing. You saw it. Yeah. She's trending right now. People are speculating already. You haven't even said yes. Feels like I already did, Kash replied, eyes narrowing. By Saturday, he was in the green room at Co Studios. Polished, professional. Every corner optimized for aesthetics. Ben handed him a schedule. They're framing this as a panel, but it's not. You're the counterweight, and her team knows it. Kash scanned the page. They think I'll crack. They think you'll react. That's how they'll clip it. Kash said nothing. He'd faced congressional committees, run intelligence briefings, but this was different. This was live, emotional, performative. There was no cross-examination, no rules of evidence, just lights and narrative. The show's producer stepped in. You'll be joining Letitia after the first segment. She'll open, then bring you in. Any idea what she's opening with? The producer smiled tightly. Faith in a pluralistic age, but she may shift depending on mood. Mood, right. Letitia Co. began with flair. Welcome back, everyone. Tonight we're diving deep into belief, into systems, and into what still holds weight in an ever-changing world. Applause. Some say religion is rising, others say it's weaponized. Tonight we hear both sides. Then she turned. Please welcome Kash Patel. Kash walked in. No podium, just 2 chairs, 2 microphones, and a crowd hungry for confrontation. Letitia didn't waste time. Mr. Patel, she began. You've said in the past that moral clarity comes from absolute truth, but we live in a world of nuance. Do you really believe a 2,000-year-old book can provide answers to 21st century problems? There it was. The question, the tone, the framing. The audience leaned in. He waited 3 seconds before answering, just enough to let the air shift. I do, he said calmly, and not just because I believe it, but because I've seen it work. Letitia raised an eyebrow. In legal briefs or in real life? In real life, let me tell you a story. A murmur moved through the crowd. Kash leaned forward. Years ago, I worked on a case involving human trafficking. One witness, a mother, was too afraid to testify. She'd seen horrors, been threatened, and didn't trust anyone. But when I sat across from her, she noticed my cross. Asked if I was that kind of person. I said yes. She cried and said, then maybe I'm safe. Silence. She testified, we won. That woman is alive, free, and raising her kids. Not because of policy, but because in that moment, truth meant something. Letitia blinked. The air in the studio changed. A few heads nodded. A few others looked uncomfortable. The expected viral moment didn't arrive. Letitia regrouped. But isn't that dangerous to base public decisions on private convictions? Kash replied, what's more dangerous is pretending public life can be values-free. We all bring our beliefs. The question is whether we acknowledge them or hide behind algorithms. That landed. Even Letitia paused. Ben watched from backstage, stunned. This wasn't fireworks. It was something more subversive. It was conviction. delivered without condescension, truth without noise. And it was starting to work. In the final minutes of the segment, Letitia asked, "So are you saying faith has a place in governance?" "I'm saying it already does," Kash answered. "We just pretend it doesn't, so we don't have to be accountable for the values driving our policies." No applause, no jeers, just breathless quiet. Backstage, a producer whispered into her mic clip that, "Timestamp it, that's the moment." And maybe it was. The clip hit social media less than 10 minutes after the show wrapped. A 26-second segment, Kash's final line and Letitia's visible pause looped endlessly. Commentators latched onto it. Influencers on both ends of the spectrum reposted it with wildly different takes. Faith Under Fire and Kash Patel trended simultaneously. One labeled Kash a symbol of resilience, the other accused him of sneaking ideology into civil discourse. But something stranger happened too. People who didn't typically watch political talk shows began engaging. In churches, coffee shops, and college lounges, people weren't just reacting, they were debating. Letitia's staff regrouped that night. Her producer Deirdre closed the door behind her tablet in hand. "You've seen the numbers?" she asked. Letitia nodded, skyrocketing. "And the sentiment analysis?" Letitia raised an eyebrow. "Mixed. Polarized, but there's something else. People say they saw something different in you." Letitia didn't answer immediately. "I didn't plan to blink," she said quietly. Deirdre shrugged. Sometimes blinking is what makes it real. Meanwhile, Kash returned to his hotel and turned off every alert. His phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from old colleagues, strangers, even media outlets requesting interviews. Ben knocked. "You should see this." He handed Kash a printout. A local pastor had republished the story on his church's blog with a headline, "Truth doesn't yell, it leans in." Kash sat down, exhausted but calm. "It's not about me," he said. "No," Ben replied. "It's about what you reminded people of." By morning, national media jumped in. Panel shows, editorial writers, and faith-based newsletters weighed in. What made this different was not the argument, but the tone. Letitia's next broadcast was announced within 48 hours, a follow-up solo episode titled "When Faith Walks In." Speculation surged. Would she double down, apologize, or pivot? Her opening monologue was simple. "I've made a career by asking hard questions, but sometimes the hardest ones are the ones I don't ask out loud. Like, why did I react the way I did to Kash Patel?" She paused. "I disagreed with his worldview before he walked in. I still do on many counts, but in a moment I expected debate, I found something else. Clarity, even grace. Some viewers applauded, others rolled their eyes, but everyone was still watching." Letitia then aired the full, unedited interview, no commercial breaks. That night, viewership broke the show's 3-year record. In the following days, Letitia and Kash's teams were approached about doing a follow-up together. A town hall, neutral ground, no moderation tricks. Kash hesitated. Ben advised, "This isn't about your brand, this is about finishing the story." Letitia had already agreed. The town hall was scheduled for a week later. The venue, a community college auditorium in Ohio. Chosen not for prestige, but for what it symbolized, ordinary voices. The format was simple. Each would speak for 10 minutes, then take unscripted questions from the audience. The night arrived. Letitia wore neutral tones, no earpiece, no cards. Kash walked in alone with only a worn notebook in hand. They didn't shake hands right away, but they did smile. Letitia opened. "I've built platforms. Kash has built cases. We don't agree on many things, but we both agree conversations don't work when we only perform them." Kash followed. "I came here not to convert, but to clarify. We cannot navigate a pluralistic society unless we know where we're starting from." The first question from the crowd was from a student named Layla. "Do you think truth is the same for everyone?" Letitia looked to Kash. He answered first. "Truth exists, but our distance from it varies." Letitia added, "And sometimes it takes someone else's truth to reveal what we're blind to." The room was silent, but it was no longer tense. By the end of the night, people didn't clap because they'd been impressed. They clapped because something had broken and something new had begun. The following morning, the town hall made headlines. Faith and Reason in the same room read one headline. Two Worlds, One Dialogue said another. But the most shared was from a small opinion blog. They didn't yell, they listened. Letitia sat in her office with Deirdre, both sipping coffee in silence. So Deirdre finally said, "You changed course." Letitia shrugged. "I didn't change course, I changed tone." Meanwhile, Kash was back in D.C., pacing his apartment phone, buzzing again. Ben had been filtering the messages. "You've got 4 speaking invites, 2 book agents, and someone from a documentary team." Kash chuckled. "What's the documentary?" "Title pending, working name When Faith Surprised the Room." He didn't answer right away. "Tell them I'm not ready for lights again." But it was already too late. What had begun as a confrontation had become a conversation, and that conversation was spreading. Across universities, houses of worship, and online forums, people were revisiting the original interview and the town hall line by line. Some schools added the clip to curriculum on civil discourse. Churches debated it during sermons. Podcasts began referencing it without needing to explain the context. A week later, a public radio host invited Letitia and Kash back together. The host, neutral and soft-spoken, welcomed them both with grace. "What's changed for you since that night?" the host asked. Letitia replied first. "I've stopped assuming calmness means compromise. Sometimes it just means conviction expressed differently." Kash added, "And I've remembered that disagreement doesn't mean disrespect. We've gotten too used to confusing the two." The next segment took a deeper turn. They were asked, what about the future? Will this fade like every other media cycle? Kash looked thoughtful. It might, but not if people pick up the conversation where we left it. Letitia nodded. "We don't need a new ideology. We need a better practice of talking, listening, and owning our truths without canceling someone else's." The radio episode went viral. Calls for a wider national conversation began. Not a debate stage, not a political forum, something slower, civil, relational. And so an idea emerged, a nationwide listening tour. Letitia's team called it Common Ground. Kash's team called it Front Porch Talks. They merged the names, the ground and the porch. Cities signed up. So did churches, libraries, and even barbershops. At every stop, they kept the same format, no prepared speeches. A single question drawn from a box, then open discussion. Questions range from the profound, can love exist without shared beliefs? What does forgiveness look like in a divided world? To the personal, what's one moment you changed your mind about something important? To the humorous, have you ever tried changing someone's mind and ended up changing your own instead? Audiences leaned in. No shouting, no platforms, just people in a room talking. By the fifth city, something remarkable happened. 2 college students from opposite political clubs started co-hosting a campus discussion series. Inspired by the tour, they called it Honest Noise. A week later, a small-town mayor who'd attended one of the sessions introduced a resolution to fund community dialogue spaces. "We build parks. Why not build understanding?" he said. The ripple effect was growing. Even Congress took notice. A bipartisan group proposed a national listening day. Skeptics rolled their eyes, another symbolic act. But the public response was louder than expected. A poll found 72% of respondents said they'd watched either the original town hall or a clip from it. 61% said it changed how they viewed political disagreement. That number startled everyone. Letitia and Kash weren't heroes, they weren't symbols, they were just different. People started calling them the bridge voices. Kash laughed when he heard it. "We're not the bridge," he told Ben. "We're just showing people the water isn't that deep if you're willing to wade in." Letitia, for her part, told her team, "I've interviewed presidents, authors, and visionaries. But I think what moved people was that I didn't interview Kash. I met him. And in that meeting, something shifted. Not policy, not religion, not sides, but posture. And that was enough to start something real." In the months that followed, the conversation grew beyond Letitia and Kash. Their listening sessions became a model adopted by others. Civic centers, church groups, libraries, and high schools began hosting their own porch circles. At one such circle in rural Pennsylvania, a farmer and a climate activist debated land use and discovered shared concerns over water rights. In Oakland, a former gang leader and a city councilwoman led a youth discussion on justice, both speaking not as opponents but as neighbors. In one town in Kansas, a pastor and an atheist co-wrote a local newspaper column together each week, tackling a current issue from their respective lenses. The column's tagline read, "We don't agree, but we don't ignore." Letitia and Kash kept attending as many as they could, not to headline, just to witness. At a session in New Orleans, an elderly woman stood up and said, "Y'all reminded me of my parents. They used to argue about everything, but never went to bed without kissing goodnight." The room laughed, but some wiped tears. Even media outlets adjusted. One network launched a primetime segment called Shared Table, modeled after Letitia and Kash's format. Instead of shouting matches, it featured guests asked to listen to one another without interruption. Ratings soared. Some critics called it performative. But the movement endured not because it was perfect, but because it met a hunger people hadn't fully named. The hunger to speak, to be heard, to disagree without dehumanizing. And slowly it was reshaping not just conversations, but culture. As the listening tour expanded, so did the scrutiny. Not everyone was applauding. Some commentators began criticizing Letitia and Kash, accusing them of performative civility and claiming their movement was naive. Articles questioned whether listening could solve structural problems or if it simply made people feel better without demanding real change. One headline read, "Are we talking too much and acting too little?" Kash responded in an op-ed, "Listening is not passivity. It's how wisdom begins. If we can't hear one another, we won't recognize what needs fixing, much less agree on how to fix it." Letitia took a different approach. On her show, she aired an entire episode featuring only critiques academic activist and even angry. Then she responded to each not defensively, but with curiosity. "Let's test our assumptions," she said, "even mine." Still, the pushback grew louder. Protesters began appearing outside tour stops. Some held signs like "Silence is not solidarity," and "Real justice requires more than talk." At one session in St. Louis, a young woman stood up and said, with respect, "What you're doing is lovely, but people are dying. Conversations don't change laws." Kash paused. "You're right to demand action. But what if the barrier to action is that we don't trust each other enough to act together?" The room fell quiet. It wasn't a solution, but it was a doorway. After that, the format evolved. Each session now included a section called From Words to Work, where participants brainstormed one concrete step their community could take together. Some planted gardens, some organized ride-sharing for elders, some lobbied their school boards. Action didn't replace listening. It flowed from it. Still, media pressure mounted. A leaked memo from a major network labeled the movement a ratings risk. Letitia's contract was threatened. Kash's political ties were questioned. Ben warned. "They're trying to frame this as weakness." Kash nodded. "It's a risk." But silence isn't safety, it's surrender. Then something unexpected happened. A group of high-profile leaders, authors, athletes, veterans, faith leaders, signed an open letter titled "In Praise of Quiet Courage." It defended the movement and called for more leaders to prioritize listening. The letter went viral. That week, Letitia and Kash were invited to speak at a global summit on democracy. Their session, Bridges and Barricades, drew the largest crowd of the event. In that talk, Letitia said, "Courage isn't always marching. Sometimes it's staying in the room after someone says something that breaks your heart." Kash added, "We don't need everyone to agree. We just need enough people who won't walk away." The applause was long, and not just polite, it was full of something rare hope. As the summit ended, one journalist asked, "What happens when this isn't trendy anymore?" Letitia replied, "Then we keep going. Quietly. Consistently. Because real change doesn't trend, it roots." And together they left the stage. In the following days, universities reached out to both teams requesting help to design coursework around civil discourse. A consortium of faith leaders across denominations proposed a national listening Sabbath, a single day each year dedicated to non-judgmental conversation between differing beliefs. The movement, once fragile, now felt resilient. Still, not all pressure came from outside. Behind closed doors, Letitia's team debated, was she losing her original audience or longtime viewers tuning out in favor of more sensational voices? Analytics showed dips in some demographics but spikes in others, particularly those previously disengaged from political shows. Letitia didn't panic. The viewers we're gaining are the ones who didn't have a seat before. I'm okay with that. Kash, too, faced tension. Some of his former allies criticized his participation. One op-ed accused him of abandoning principle for applause. He responded privately in a closed-door veterans forum. "If we can't model courage with our opponents, then what was all our sacrifice for?" There was silence. Then slowly applause. And with every wave of backlash, every moment of self-doubt, one truth became clearer: this wasn't just a campaign. It was a countercurrent, and it was beginning to reshape the river itself. The winter months brought a slower pace, but not a quieter impact. With the tour paused for holidays and reflection, Kash and Letitia each returned to their home cities, he to DC, she to Atlanta. The break offered space to review, refocus, and plan what came next. But it also brought fresh questions. Letitia met with her executive producer in a quiet coffee shop. "This work is valuable," she said. But how do we grow it without losing what made it honest? Her producer Nadia answered with a question of her own. What if it's not about scale, but depth? So Letitia proposed a new series filmed conversations between everyday Americans across stark divides, ideological, racial, religious, generational. They would speak for 90 minutes, no edits. Letitia would appear only to introduce, then step back. The pilot featured a Black Lives Matter organizer and a retired police captain. The raw honesty, awkward pauses, and unexpected laughter stunned viewers. Emails poured in. One viewer wrote, "For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone." Meanwhile, Kash reconnected with fellow veterans, hosting small roundtable discussions on what it meant to serve and what it meant to heal. One meeting held in a rec center in Tulsa led to something bigger. A Gold Star father stood up and said, "You both talk about bridges. How about we build one?" And so they did. With funds raised by local businesses and volunteers from 3 faiths, they repaired a neglected pedestrian bridge connecting 2 divided neighborhoods. A plaque now reads, "Dedicated to the conversations that brought us closer." That act sparked a new movement. Build the Bridge. Communities across the country began restoring neglected public spaces in the name of reconciliation. Kash and Letitia didn't try to direct it. They just showed up, quietly, gratefully. At the national level, the ripples continued. A state senator from Wisconsin introduced a bill mandating civil discourse education in public schools. The bill was met with initial skepticism until footage of Letitia and Kash's first town hall was played during the committee hearing. The vote passed, narrowly, but it passed. Still, the work took a toll. Late one night, Letitia called Kash, "Do you ever feel like we're carrying too much?" He didn't answer right away. "Yes, but I also think we're not meant to carry it alone." They talked until sunrise. By spring, Letitia and Kash agreed to co-author a book. Not a memoir, not a manifesto, but a field guide. Titled Across the Table, it would include personal reflection stories from their journey and practical tools for meaningful dialogue. They wrote from opposite coasts, editing each other's words with respect and occasional disagreement. It wasn't always smooth, but it was honest. Publishers scrambled for the rights. A bidding war ended in a 6-figure deal, but Kash and Letitia pledged most of the proceeds to fund grassroots dialogue initiatives. The book's announcement made waves. But what truly mattered was a passage that went viral. Listening doesn't mean losing, it means leaning, and in leaning we learn where our weight is welcome and where it's needed. Bookstores created community corners for discussion. Faith communities used it for study groups. One teacher in Arizona read a chapter aloud each week in her civics class. In an interview, she said, "My students aren't afraid to talk anymore, they're afraid of not being heard." And in that fear, something new was growing: courage. By the end of the school year, over 200 schools had incorporated materials from across the table. Universities offered to host dialogue residencies. International observers contacted Letitia's team, curious if this model could work in deeply divided regions abroad. When a delegation from Northern Ireland reached out, Letitia flew to Belfast. She spent 3 days listening, learning, and sharing. One local leader said, "You didn't come to teach, you came to understand, that's rare." Upon returning, Letitia and Kash held a joint press conference. "This movement isn't American," Kash said. "It's human." They announced a new initiative, the Global Listening Fellowship, inviting young leaders from conflict zones to train in non-adversarial communication. Applications flooded in. As the 1-year anniversary of their first conversation approached, media outlets prepared retrospectives. Documentaries aired. Editorials praised and critiqued. Letitia and Kash didn't focus on legacy. They focused on lunch. In a small diner where they first met privately, they shared a quiet meal. No cameras, no speeches. Letitia raised her glass. To the next question. Kash smiled, and the courage to wait for the answer. 1 year, 12 months, dozens of cities, hundreds of conversations. On the surface, not much seemed different. The headlines were still loud. The election still tense. The world still fractured in many ways, but underneath that, something was shifting. It wasn't just in the big moments, the summits, the speeches, the features on magazine covers. It was in the spaces that had no cameras, in the homes that hosted strangers for the first time, in the schools where students no longer feared disagreement, in the churches and community centers that turned their basements into gathering rooms instead of battlegrounds. Kash stood alone in front of the newly rebuilt bridge in Tulsa, one cool evening, hands in his pockets. A child's voice behind him said, "My mom says this is the Peace Bridge." He turned to see a young girl pointing to the plaque. "Your mom's right," he said. At that same moment, Letitia was taping the final episode of the season. No guests, no segments, just her. I used to believe influence was about volume, she said. Now I believe it's about resonance, and resonance can't be forced. It's felt. Viewers flooded the comment section with gratitude, not because she had given them answers, but because she had reminded them it was okay to ask questions. The Global Listening Fellowship welcomed its first cohort, 12 young leaders from Rwanda, Palestine, Colombia, Northern Ireland, and more. Their stories, each marked by conflict, were now met with tools, frameworks, and above all, encouragement to create dialogue where none had existed. Letitia and Kash visited them during the final week of training. They sat in the circle as participants shared their stories, not as mentors, but as peers. When one fellow from Syria stood to speak, she said, "You taught me something no warlord ever could power isn't about taking space. It's about making space." By the end of the year, Across the Table had been translated into 7 languages. It wasn't just a book. It had become a curriculum, a conversation starter, a toolkit for reconciliation. Yet, even with all the accolades and milestones, Letitia and Kash knew this was just a beginning. "We planted something," Kash said during one final interview. "What happens next depends on the soil we leave behind." In one of the last public letters they co-wrote, they reflected dialogue is not the end. It is the door. What we walk into together, peace policy partnership that's up to us, but the door must stay open. And so it did. In quiet towns and busy cities, intense school boards and hopeful youth groups, the door stayed open. Some walked through with caution, others with courage, but more and more they walked through. Legacy is often misunderstood. It isn't what's etched in stone. It's what grows quietly again and again in places no monument will ever reach. And that quietly, steadily, unmistakably is what they left behind.